On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Claude Jones. He is the VP of Engineering at Strava. We're going to be talking about building a high-performing engineering culture. Claude's going to touch on some of the backstory of what he was brought in at Strava to do and some of the areas he was going to focus on. We're going to be talking about some of the elements that go into building that high-performing culture. And I hope we get to touch on what leveraging the power of time is. I think Claude mentioned that. I think hopefully we'll touch on that before we end the show. Claude, thanks for being on.
Hey, excited to be here.
Awesome. Let's start off at the top. I know we're going to hear about Strava a bit more, but two things I like to start off with is to understand what the company does and your responsibilities as a VP of Engineering.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Mayor, definitely excited to be here and speaking with you today. And Strava is the largest sports community in the world. So we say it's in 195 countries, and it's definitely making a major impact. Now, what Strava actually does itself is Strava records data from user activities. So cycling, running, use GPS to help monitor that progress. And there's other activity types that they have as well, hiking, other types of sports. But essentially, they track this data. You can share it with other users or you can that are followed publicly. But, think about it as a combination of, sports and, a social networking combined together to help ensure that people are healthy.
Awesome. And then what are your, I guess at a high level, what are some of your responsibilities as the VP of Engineering?
From at a very high level, being brought on, I'm helped to grow and scale the team, helping with operational efficiency, really from a planning perspective, architectural alignment, helping to just build collaboration across product, design, marketing, and engineering, really to ensure that we're developing high scale products for the company.
Awesome. And I know, you've been there for about a year. Obviously, you're brought in as the VP of Engineering. And we're going to be talking about building a high performing culture. Always good to understand, when you first joined, what things look like. What was the mandate? Obviously, probably taking charge of engineering and growing is always the baseline, as you mentioned. But what are some of the requirements of the job when you first started? Then obviously, hopefully, we'll dive into some of the challenges.
Yeah, I think the requirements for the job was I was taking over for the old VP, the VP of Engineering at the time had converted to the CTO. And so I was stepping into his role as the new leader coming in. And so, stepping into a company culture that had been around for 13 years. And, when you think about growing, scaling the team, helping to streamline some of the planning and execution processes, in addition to helping to help enhance the culture that had already been developed, was definitely a challenge for someone new coming into that environment. And so, stepping into the role as a new leader, driving cultural change, helping to push different ways of working were things that were definitely a challenge for me.
I guess a question, as CTO, you're stepping into the shoes of the person that became the CTO. How does that dynamic work? I mean, obviously, you're backfilling for a role. He's being promoted. Those are all positive things. He's leaving the shoes you're looking to fill. How does that relationship, when you're first, taking over, how does that relationship start? When you guys were kind of, discussing the transition, the expectations, maybe just touch on that real quick.
That's a great question. That was a concern of mine, is just what that transition would look like. And what I would say is that, my boss was extremely open. Like, we sat down and had a very candid conversation about, in order for my success to really shine through, we're going to have a transition period here. And how can you support with that transition period? And so one of the things that we did was we aligned on what the role as CTO would be for him and what the expectations would be for me stepping into my role. We aligned up front on what success looked like, the first 30, 60, 90 days. And then we had a meeting where we, sticking with the theme of sports, the passing the baton. And so we had a meeting with all engineering on, this is what this means. This is what Claude's role is, what, Steve Lloyd, the CTO, what his role is, and what we're going to be moving forward with the transition. And so, it felt great, at least, to kind of establish those baselines up front.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's imperative, and also that it leads to a healthy working relationship right off the bat. I mean, you guys are growing. It's a big product, massive adoption on a global basis. Obviously, having an engineering team, this high performing culture to keep pace with the development, making sure that the product stays top quality. I guess when you were looking at setting up your roadmap, I want to really instill that high performing culture. Not that you guys weren't, but you always want to raise the game. Everyone wants to raise the game. Oh, a lot of sportsman analogies, obviously. But when you were looking at that and you're starting to evaluate what to focus on, how were you picking and choosing what those building blocks were? You can't change too many things. You got to kind of finesse what those opportunities are.
Oh man, 100%. So when I first started, I'd say the first week was just consuming information. And so I had the opportunity to meet with at least the senior leaders, managers, and ICs within the org. And we had like a 3-day session where I had a chance to just listen and learn what have been some of their ongoing pain points that they faced. And a lot of it centered around, not investing in tech debt. Technology, especially on the foundation side, not feeling like they had a voice when it came to product roadmap prioritization. Teams not being balanced out correctly, just with hiring and where things were going. And so we captured all this stuff, voted on the top 10 items that, the team needed my help with. And a lot of it was just, we want to make sure that technology feels like a first-class citizen and that we're able to reduce some of the tech debt. And so that became at least the top priority for the engineering org to address, over the first, quarter.
Absolutely. So as you're looking at, coming in and wanting to, develop the elements of that high performing culture, did you have to help people understand that there's a mindset shift? I guess, how did you approach that?
Yeah. One of the analogies that I use is around kind of running a marathon. And we know a marathon is 26.2 miles. And, when you think about just the average time that it takes to run that, it's about 4 hours or so. But people that are really training and doing what they need to do, they can run that in two hours to sort of get that done. And when you think about the level of practice, discipline, and sort of pushing yourself to get outside your comfort zone, to sort of be on the podium, to do that, that's where Strava needed to be and what's going on. And so as we started thinking about, engineering excellence as a way of helping to push and be on the podium, what does that actually look like and what does that mean? And there were 3 things that I had shared with my team. Aside from just understanding the landscape and having clarity on the types of problems that we wanted to solve, like getting on the same page about where we're going, what do we need to do, I think the biggest part was around setting clear expectations, roles, responsibilities, and ensuring that people understood what was expected of them. And the last really being empowerment. So now that we have an understanding of where we're going, the expectations of what's happening, people feeling empowered to actually achieve that and really having that support, holistically. So at least those are the three big buckets that we kind of walk through with the org.
Absolutely. I guess, as you're kind of going through that, and you mentioned you spend time with the team, how much did you have to inventory? How much did you have to take on from the people on the ground doing the work that, obviously were part of a culture, as was in a scaling company? How much of that did you have to take on and start factoring into kind of what you envisioned as the engineering excellence?
I would say it was, 80% the company, 20% me. The reason why I say that is that, while I might have experience, in other organizations and other things that I'm doing, to try to force kind of these thoughts within Strava wouldn't have made sense, right? It would have been a rejection right off the bat. And so I had to understand and learn their language. Now, I had a very short period of time to sort of pick some of this stuff up, but I did a lot of due diligence prior to me starting Strava to understand the pain points and the problems, starting at the leadership level. Where were their challenges that they saw and what was going on? Because a lot of these things, if you're not aligned with leader and they don't have your support, trying to kind of work from the bottoms up, there'll be resistance there. So my first step was aligning from a leadership point of view. The second step was really aligning with the teams and the problems that they were facing. And I think between those two things made up the 80% of what formulated at least my thoughts and ideas around how to help guide and move the engineering organization forward.
So I guess in terms of, you're approaching the engineering excellence, and there was probably some existing measures. You have to measure, what's already happening. If you want to change something, you're going to want to measure and track what's being changed. How does the metrics component of this work to make sure that there's that ability, that visibility that, hey, these changes are going to be for the good?
Yeah. So if the questions around, how are we measuring progress? There's two metrics that we look at. One being sort of revenue, things that are more business focused. The second being really focused on operational efficiency goals. And so this could be anything like quality of our product. How do we scale, the systems that we have? Looking at the velocity at which we execute things, the cost of the infrastructure that we have and what's going on. And so it really is making sure that looking at kind of that OpEx aspect of things, and are we hoping to save money from the bottom line, and how that kind of correlates or attributes towards, business success. It's building that discipline, because it wasn't something that was top of mind for Strava. They knew it was important, but the visibility of creating that really wasn't there. And so making sure that those goals or metrics or KPIs are clear, and then making sure that we have goals that align to that. So if we have certain initiatives that might focus on quality automation, or initiatives on helping to reduce the cost of our infrastructure, initiatives that are looking at trying to improve the velocity within teams, making sure that work had a clear ROI or goal assigned to it, and having the means of being able to track that.
Absolutely. I guess, you're putting metrics to judge people's efficiencies, understand, what's not measured, and it's hard to evaluate. I get that. And I guess the component of this that maybe be nice to hear about is, the current staff that's in place, you want to help them level up. You want to help them excel. You need the right type of, training development, right type of mentorship. How did you start evaluating the pieces you need to make sure that people were properly supported as well?
Yeah, one of the things that we did sort of coming in was making sure from a roles and expectation perspective that we took a look at competencies. I think the biggest challenge that I saw with Strava is that people were asking questions like, hey, I don't have clarity on what's expected of my role, or I've been with the company for X number of years and I'm ready to get a promotion. Or how do you compare me to someone else? Managers were asking, well, how do I calibrate and doing things between one another? So we didn't really have an objective way of being able to calibrate our folks or provide them the guidance to get things going. So I worked with my leaders and the people team, and we came up with our competencies and proficiencies framework. And it truly was a framework that looked at a few different things. Competencies really being sort of the foundation on how we think about building a high performance culture, because that will help drive like our talent assessment, the training and development, performance management, promotions, our hiring strategy, our succession planning. And so we looked at that from the get-go, and we broke things out into about 4 categories of competencies. One was around delivering on business goals. So when you had asked a question about, aligning our work to business goals, this was an important piece of that, making sure that the stuff that we're doing was adding business value. Second, just being engineering, is really looking at the technical aptitude. So solution designing, code quality, production readiness, really focusing on those pieces. Planning and execution efficiency, how we prioritize, deliver the code with quality and agility is another important piece. And the last was around people leadership, coaching development, helping to train others, providing a supportive environment, helping to attract talent. And so these competencies were used both at the IC and the manager level to help support our folks.
I guess as you're, anytime there's any shift, any adjustments, evaluation of talent, evaluation of efficiency metrics, I mean, there's bound to be some hard conversations to be had. You need to assess people. Those are not always the easiest. Looking at that side of the house when you approach, dealing with, you mentioned, leadership buy-in, then working with, the teams. Like, what kind of hard conversations do you have to help move the process forward to make sure that you're going to get the most out of it?
Yeah, with the competencies and proficiency framework that we put in place, it's a multi-phased approach. Number one, Strava already had sort of competencies that they had at the company level, but things were very subjective. And with that subjective, when you get into calibration sessions, it became very opinionated. And so, as part of going through a cycle, it allowed me to kind of use that cycle as a case study to say, are there room for improvements? And really asking individuals, like, what are areas for improvements? How can we make this more objective to help reduce some of the churn that we're seeing with these conversations? And so once we were able to articulate the need, it became very easy to say, okay, let's fill this need. And then I provided a very high level guidance. It was the teams. I had a leader that was driving this with two other teammates that were passionate about this topic, working with the people team. And they went full tilt to sort of get this done and define it, and reviewed with me and figured it out. And then we sort of rolled it out slowly, where we rolled out to managers, and then we had a bigger meeting to sort of get this done. So this is how we rolled it out. Now, I think we're still in that mode for like the hard conversations really going on, like putting this into practice. And I think, there's a model that I've always put in place, is that, are people clear on the roles and responsibilities that they have to do? If yes, are they the right person for the job? And if the answer is, well, yes, they are, but there's some gaps, are they coachable? Can we train them? If they can't be trained, then maybe that might not be the right fit for them. We have to maybe explore some other opportunities. If that doesn't exist, there might be other conversations that need to be had. We haven't really gone through that exercise yet within the company, but I am anticipating that there's going to be some training to kind of go, because those conversations are hard to have.
Absolutely. And I think what's, in listening to you, obviously it sounds like there's going to be standards, there's going to be shifts. You want everyone to understand them and have a chance. Either we help you level up and you succeed, or maybe, like you mentioned, not the right fit. I guess on the flip side, when you're asking people to level up, part of a high performing culture is having teams that also not only meet expectations, but during the day to day, they know that they have ownership, they're empowered, they need to have that ability. I guess when you're thinking about that side of the culture and making sure people have that sense of ownership, I guess what's happening, what's being put in place?
Yeah, there are a few things that we're looking at here. I think one is around ownership. The second is around responsibility. And the third is around accountability. And there are sort of two sides to this. I think there's a leadership side that is really helping to ensure that they're instilling that sense of ownership by providing clarity and guidance, what I like to call guided autonomy, for teams, but they're providing that level of guidance. And then once that guidance has been provided and that sense of ownership has been instilled, it's the teams then that would then take on that responsibility, being obligated to say, I know the task that I need to do. And from that task, I know I need to strive to hit that desired outcome. And this is where goals really come into play here, and having that well established. Now, we all know that sometimes, even if we have all these pieces in place and everything is working the way it needs to, we might not succeed. And I think this is where that accountability really comes in. And the accountability that, hey, I tried something, I failed, and I'm going to own up to that. And, I think in order for this to work, we have to be able to embrace a culture of, like, failure is really a learning experience. And we have to change the narrative on, fail. You didn't get an F. All you just got was a mark that says, hey, look, now I know what not to do moving forward. And I think as long as we continue to have that ownership, have the responsibility, and have that accountability to our leadership and, employee or align on where they need to go, that creates a sense of empowerment, and it builds on a foundation of trust.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually think, I'm a big proponent of it's either you're succeeding, you're figuring out what didn't work, and you go try again. And I don't think there's any other way of looking at it without feeling the mental side of our day to day and even our lives. I guess you've been talking about the high performing culture. You've mentioned ownership. You've mentioned responsibility. I think a lot of this translates to some of the key relationships, the trust you need. I mean, the team becomes more efficient. Really, they become better with time. I guess when you're looking at the outcome and what you're hoping to see, like what is that? What is the outcome? What are you trying to accomplish in the end?
In the end, for me, success looks like people have the support that they need to have the ownership, to have the responsibility and accountability for their role. And while leadership is really pushing for that, I think at the same time, employees need to feel empowered to have that curiosity, to be proactive, to kind of show that promise that they want to drive and deliver on that. And that's what success looks like for me. And as you were talking about, like time just being an important factor of this, I think any change management process when a new leader is coming in, things don't happen overnight. And, time is something that can be used as a very powerful tool. It helps you build relationships. It will help you build trust. If you create the time, you have the opportunity to learn. And when a whole bunch of things are happening simultaneously, time allows you to sort of adapt to change as well, to get comfortable with it. And I think as leaders, being able to leverage time in that way to build those relationships, to build the trust, to learn and adapt to change, it makes the empowerment piece, it makes setting clear expectations very clear. And it also helps setting and understanding the landscape that you're entering in a lot more easier when you're creating time for that.
Awesome. It all sounds like a lot of moving parts, I'm sure, for you. And I'm sure there's a lot that goes into it. I was actually thinking, I'd love to have you on in a year again to just see where things have gone. I think that'd be a great activity to do and kind of take some of the learning lessons of, as you mentioned, still having some of those hard conversations. It's only your first year. I think it'd be awesome to have you back on. I was going to ask you, cognizant of the time, I always like to ask two questions to wrap up before I let you go back to your day job. One is, if you had a question, it could be a single question, it could be a topic that you want a future guest to talk to, what would that be?
I think one thing that would be a interesting topic is sort of balancing priorities between marketing, product, and technology. That tends to be this weird tension on who wins what, who gets on the roadmap. That could be an interesting topic on lessons learned from leaders on how they've done prioritization around that.
That's a great one. I like that. It's gonna have me searching for somebody to talk about that, because I think that's actually would be a really interesting episode. Claude, what's a good way? I mean, you've tons of good piece of content in here. I'm sure people are going to want to reach out and ask you about it. What's a good way of someone to get a hold of you?
Well, can definitely reach me at cjones at Strava.com. That's the work email there. And then I'm getting kicked out here. cjones at Strava.com. And then I have the Practical Leadership Guy, which is a website that I have that just talks about just challenges that I face day to day. It's really an authentic, honest look at some of the struggles that I've gone through as a leader, and hopefully those tips in there that can kind of help you out.
Awesome. We'll make sure those are both in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on. That's it for this episode. Back on again with a different guest, different topic. Until then, I ask for two things. One, if the podcast was useful, please share it. That's how we're growing. And secondly, if you know someone or you yourself can talk about balancing those priorities between marketing, product, and technology, love to have you on as a guest. That's it for this episode. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.